Hello and welcome to Troops and Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered. If your group is using the Legacy Edition rules, please see my original Troops video that is linked in the description. Troops allow a large number of individuals to function as a single unit. Mechanically, this has a lot of advantages. Rather than having to track 24 or more different creatures, the GM only has to manage one single large creature. And troops also allow narrative moments where the players are overwhelmed by the sheer number of their foes. If presented as individuals, they likely would pose little to no challenge for the heroes, but when they're statted together as a troop, they can be formidable. In this regard, troops are not entirely dissimilar from the swarm mechanics used when battling large groups of vermin, but there are a few important distinctions. To illustrate how troops work, we'll be looking at the stat block for a City Guard squadron. Each individual member of the City Guard is a medium-sized creature and occupies one square. But when a large group of them gather together, they may function as a troop. A fresh, undamaged troop occupies 16 squares like a gargantuan-sized creature, but not a single 16-square area. Instead, these 16 squares are divided into 4 2x2 square segments. If the troop is made up of individual medium or small-sized units like the City Guards, it may be best to represent the troop with 16 tokens or miniatures. And if the troop is made up of large-sized units like mounted cavalry, you can represent each segment using a single large-sized token or miniature. But within the narrative, it's important to remember the troop is not literally 16 City Guards. It's often many more. Each square is crowded with bodies, and the map, miniatures, and troop rules exist to simplify the mechanics of the encounter in a somewhat abstract way. Each segment can be positioned on the map independently from the others, except each segment must share a border that's at least 5 feet in length with another segment so that they are all chained together. And it's not enough for the segments to be diagonal from one another, they must share a border with each other. For example, this is a legal shape for a troop, and so is this or this. But this is not a legal shape, nor is this. Also, it's important to note that as a troop suffers damage, it shrinks in size, which makes sense. As members of the troop are whittled away, the troop itself becomes smaller and smaller. This is represented in the rules by including 2 hit point thresholds. We see here that a City Guard squadron starts with 75 hit points and a parenthetical noting 4 segments. And then we see the 2 thresholds. The first threshold says 50 and 3 segments, meaning that after the City Guard squadron as a whole has suffered 25 points of damage, one of its 4 segments is removed from the map. And after it suffers another 25 points of damage, it hits its second hit point threshold and loses another segment. There are some special rules regarding how troops suffer damage. The troop as a whole has a single pool of hit points that is shared among all of its segments. Meaning, damage is abstracted so that if one segment is targeted for an attack and hit, its damage is applied to the entire troop and not specifically the one segment that was targeted. Each time a troop's hit points is pushed past one of its thresholds, a segment is removed. By law, the player who deals that damage that pushes the troop past a threshold typically gets to decide which segment is removed, but I find it much easier for the GM to be the one who makes that call, because sometimes the abstracted nature of troop combat can be confusing for some players. For example, if Valeros attacks the troop here with a melee attack and deals enough damage to push it past its first threshold, Valeros' player might logically declare that this segment be the one that's removed. However, it can't be removed because doing so would leave the troop in an illegal formation on the map. Remember, each segment must share a border with another segment. So the segment that's removed must be one of these. And that can feel counterintuitive for players, so GMs will need to describe what happens within the narrative. As Valoros chops down the foes in front of him, more soldiers rush in to take their place, which has the result of shrinking the troop, starting with the segments that are furthest out and sharing only one border. Also, every time a troop is reduced to one of its thresholds, the listed value for that threshold becomes the troop's new maximum hit point value. Meaning, if the City Guard squadron was reduced beyond its first threshold of 50 and left with 40 hit points, and then received 20 points of healing, it would only be able to heal back up to 50 hit points, its most recently passed threshold, and any excess healing would be lost. In order to restore lost segments and its original maximum hit points, a troop needs to spend downtime to use long-term treatment on casualties or recruit new members to replace those that were lost. At 0 hit points, the troop can no longer function as a unit. At this point, the troop is defeated and its remaining members either flee, surrender, or are killed off depending on the troop's nature and the disposition of the players. We should also take a look at how troops deal with non-damaging effects. Troops are usually immune to any non-damaging effect that only targets a single creature, like a charm spell or using the Intimidate skill to demoralize. However, non-damaging abilities that target at least 5 creatures can affect an entire segment. Abilities that target 10 creatures can affect 2 segments, and abilities that target 20 or more creatures can affect an entire troop. And for non-damaging abilities that target all creatures within a certain area, each segment that is completely within that area is affected and rolls their saves and other checks individually. If a non-damaging effect would prevent a segment from acting, causing them to flee or otherwise make them unable to function as part of the troop for 1 round or more, that segment is removed entirely. When this happens, the troop's hit points are reduced to its next threshold to account for the lost segment, and note that if a single ability has both damaging and non-damaging effects, apply the damage first and then the non-damaging effects. So for example, say a player casts Command on the troop. The command spell normally only targets one enemy and therefore has no effect on the troop even if the troop was to critically fail their save. Making one soldier temporarily incapacitated by a spell like this will not have a significant impact on the troop as a whole. But if the player heightens that spell to 5th rank, it now targets 10 creatures, which means it has the ability to affect 2 segments. Each segment rolls their will saves against the spell independently. We'll say the first segment fails their will save, and the second segment critically fails their will save. This causes the troop to shrink by 1 segment, so why would the troop lose only 1 segment here and not 2 when it failed both of its saves? Because in order for a non-damaging effect to remove a segment, it must prevent that segment from acting for at least 1 round. Failing a will save against command causes the target to lose 1 action, not an entire turn, but critically failing causes the target to lose all 3 actions, which is most likely an entire round. Given the unusual size and shape of troops, they have special rules to manage their movement too. Troops spend actions to move like normal creatures do. For example, a City Guard squadron can spend 1 action to stride 25 feet. But when troops move, you select one of their segments to be the leading segment, and move it as you would normally move a single large-sized creature, and then all of the other segments follow behind that segment. When the leading segment finishes its move, the remaining segments can be placed in any orientation that is legal and does not require them to move a greater distance than the leading segment. Troops can also spend a single action to adjust their formation. When performing this, you simply select one segment that stays in place and then move the other segments into any formation you wish as long as it is legal, meaning each segment shares an edge as normal. This is all the official guidance that's given, so GMs may need to make their own calls as to what happens when troops try to move through or reorient themselves in unusual situations or unusual environments. There really aren't any special rules for how a troop functions in combat, but there are a few shared similarities. Troops function like any normal monster with an armor class and saving throws to defend against incoming attacks. And they also may have resistances, immunities, and weaknesses, especially against area and splash damage. And each have their own listed attacks in their stat blocks. Most of these will be some manner of area attack, as every member of the troop strikes at once against any enemies within their range, and therefore most troop attacks target reflex and not armor class. For example, city guard squadrons have 2 attacks, lower halberds and shoot crossbows. Lower halberds cost 1 to 3 actions, but can only be performed once per round. This attack targets all enemies within 10 feet of any of the troop's spaces and deals an amount of damage based on the number of actions spent. Unlike normal single halberd attacks, this attack is resisted by a reflex saving throw instead of armor class. And shoot crossbows takes 2 actions and allows the troop to fire their crossbows into a 10-foot burst area within 120 feet of them. Unlike regular crossbow attacks, this one is defended with reflex instead of armor class, and note that when a troop shrinks in size, so does the area for this attack. So those are the general rules for troops. I will say that there are not a lot of hard rules for troops. They don't receive as detailed a write-up as one might expect, and instead we only have a couple of glossary entries to guide us. As such, there will likely be situations you encounter that there is no hard rule for, and will need to improvise and make your best rolling as needed. In general, my advice for these moments is to keep it as simple as possible, and where mechanics are involved, treat the troops as one creature and not focus too heavily on the narrative presenting the troops as a bunch of individuals. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and as always, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone out there who supports me and this channel, whether that be by clicking the like button, leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel, or subscribing to the Patreon. I greatly appreciate everything you do to support me, and with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.